as we're closing the Mishnah of Kiddushin, we're getting into questions about education. What sort of profession is it okay to teach a child? And we actually started the last Mishnah already. Rabbi Yudah says that lo yireh ravak behemah, an unmarried man shouldn't be tending cattle. And he goes on to say that someone whose business is with women. So, for example, a gynecologist shouldn't be alone with women. So the Mishnah begins, in other words, its discussion about professions with issues related to men's relationships with women. And the Mishnah is absolutely terrified about possible breaking of boundaries that might occur if men are accustomed via their profession to be alone with women. So that's how the Mishnah begins. But it continues in a completely different direction. So let's have a look. Rabbi Meir Omer, lo yelamed adam et beno chamar gamal sapar sapan chenvani vero'eh. Rabbi Meir says, a person shouldn't teach his son to be a donkey driver, a camel driver, a hairdresser, a sailor, a shopkeeper, or a shepherd. Why not? Umanutan umanut listim, because their profession is the profession of robbers. And by the way, there are some versions of the Mishnah, not the one in the Kaufman manuscript, which we're looking at. But if you take down a printed Mishnah, we'll see that there are other opinions that don't quite take on these categorizations. But Kaufman just has this bland assertion. And then Rabbi Meir continues, Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, one should only teach his son a profession from which he can support himself. Ashrei mishilamad umanut ktana. Happy is the person with a small skill. Liot mit parnes mimena veruach habriot nocha mimenu. A small skill from which he can support himself, and the spirit of living things will come from him. It's as if the profession is a small thing, and it's how we relate to other living things that really makes a difference. Rabbi Yudah is going to agree in a kind of from a different angle, but he will agree. Rabbi Yudah Omer, L'olam lo yelamed adam et beno ela omanut nekiya v'kala. Rabbi Yudah says you should only teach your children a clean and easy profession. She'ein lecha omanut she'ein ba aniyim ve'ashirim, because every profession has poor and healthy people. So the wealth is not important. But everything depends on merit. It doesn't depend on whether it's a hard profession. It depends on merit. So choose a clean and easy profession. Huay Omer. Have you ever seen a lion who was a sabal, or a tzvi, or a deer who was a fence pruner, or a shual chenvani, or a fox that was a shopkeeper, or ze'ev godev gederot, or a wolf who mended fences? I mean, animals don't need to do this. I can deduce logically on a kal v'chomer basis. Uma im elu she nivru shelo l'shamesh konan. All these creatures that were not created to serve their creator. And they support themselves without any trouble, without any difficulty. Ani, I who was created to serve my creator. Surely I should be able to make a living without trouble. So, well, the obvious retort is Umi garamli liot mit parnas batzar. So, what has caused me to support myself only with trouble? Because we know making a living is tough, right? So, why? Omer, you should say chata'ah. You should say my sins. That's why I have trouble supporting myself. Lefi shehera oti et ma'asai vekipachti et parnasati. Because I've made my deeds evil, and that's what's made me forfeit my livelihood. So he has the same view as Rabbi Meir, that essentially what you do controls your livelihood, not what profession you choose. And now let's take a different view. Let's take Rabbi Nehorai. Now, Rabbi Nehorai is associated with Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who was a great, great innovator in Torah. And then he went off the rails. He seemed to be drinking some interesting potions or maybe smoking stuff. He got high. He came back. His friends prayed for him. And then he came back into the community of the rabbis. And this is what he says. Amar lahem Rabbi Nehorai. Rabbi Nehorai said, Maniach ani kol umanut sheba olam. Rabbi Nehorai said, I'll abandon every profession in the world. But I'm only going to teach my sons Torah. They can eat of its reward in this world, and the principle remains for them in the world to come. So I'm only going to teach my sons Torah. Because a profession only stands for a man when he's young. It only works when he's young. Because when he comes to sickness or suffering or old age, and he can't engage in his labor and his profession, he dies of starvation. So with a regular profession, you just die when you retire. But the Torah is not so. Mishameret et adam mikol ra b'na'aruto v'notenet lo acharit v'tikva b'ziknuto. Because the Torah is not like that, because it guards him against evil in his youth, and it gives him future and longevity and hope in his own in his old age. And we can even prove it from a pasuk. What does the verse say? In his youth, really interesting verse. It's actually from the Haftarah, from the Parsha of Lech Lecha. And you'll see in a minute, we're going to talk about Avraham. So maybe it's not a coincidence that Rabbi Nehorai is teaching from the Haftarah of Lech Lecha. We're going to quote a pasuk from Lech Lecha in a minute. And of course, the Haftarot are old. The Gemara in Megillah talks about which parshas you read for which Haftarot. So maybe this is not a coincidence. Anyway, the verse is, Vekovei Adonai yachalifu choach yalu ever kanasharim yarutzu velo yigau yelechu velo yafu. Those who hope for the Lord shall renew their strength. They'll spread out wings like eagles. They'll run and they will not tire. That's young. But ziknutomahu mer. So what about in old age? Od yenuvun b'sevad shenim v'ra'ananim yihiyu. They shall still bring forth fruit in old age, green and fresh they shall be. So this is Torah. This applies to anybody. And we can see it's going to apply to Avraham. And so we find it in Avraham, our father. Who observed the whole Torah before it was given, before it came into the world. So we're going to close the Seder of Nafshim on Torah, and particularly on verbal Torah, which Avraham Avinu knew. And we've said, by the way, right the way we've seen right the way through the Seder of Nafshim that it relies very heavily on verbal Torah, particularly, by the way, the Mishnah of Kiddushin, which we're closing. We find it difficult. We saw the Rambam struggle to find a source in Torah for Kiddushin. Why are we obliged to do Kiddushin, to perform Kiddushin betrothal before marriage? Well, the Rambam struggled to find a verse, although he did eventually find a verse. But this is all based on rabbinic law. It's not based on biblical law. So really interesting. Avraham is keeping verbal Torah before the Torah is given. And then we have a verse for it, of course. Shenemar Ekev Asher Shema Avraham B'Koli Vayishmor Mishmarti Mitzvotai Chukotai V'Torotai. Because Avraham obeyed Avraham heard my voice, and he kept my charge, mitzvotai, my mitzvot, chukotai, my laws, v'torotai, my Torah. So Avraham, he seems to have kept everything, and this range of things he keeps, mitzvot, chukot, Torah. Some of them must be verbal Torah, and some must be written Torah. Avraham kept everything. So, in that case, he must have received a bracha both in his youth and in his old age. And sure enough, we're going to prove this from a pasuk. We'll see. V'chenan motzab avinu Avraham sheberchu hamakom baruchu b'na'aruto u'v'zik nuto. So we'll see that Avraham was blessed by God in his youth and in his old age. And we need a verse. In his youth, what do we say? This is our verse from Lech Lecha. So this is the parallel to the verse from Isaiah, which we just read. It's the Parsha, not the Haftarah. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Torah is associated with beracha. And what about his old age? V'ziknuto mahu omer, ve'Avraham zakein ba bayamim, v'Adonai berach et Avraham bakol. Avraham was old and his days had come, and the Lord blessed Avraham with everything. This verse is from Chayei Sarah, from the end of his life. Really interesting reference, perhaps, to the beginning of the Mishnah of Kiddushin. The Mishnah, we said it struggles to learn the Kiddushin from biblical verses, but the idea of Kiddushay Kesef, the idea you can perform a betrothal by handing over an object. Today we hand over a ring. We hand over a ring, it's a silver ring, it's worth something that essentially solemn. We're not buying the woman, buying the bride when we hand over the object, but the object essentially symbolizes the Kiddushin. It symbolizes the betrothal. And the Gemara learns this tradition from the fact that Avraham handed over money to purchase the cave of Machpelah for his deceased wife, for Sarah. He pays an extraordinary sum to buy this cave in the land of Israel, the first property that Jews own in the land of Israel. He paid this enormous sum for his beloved wife. That is the verse which the Gemara uses to derive the fact that today when we get engaged, when we betroth, we hand over something of value, just like our father Avraham. So we're going to close the Mishnah of Kiddushin and the Seder of Nashim with Avraham. The Avraham zaken bayamim v'Adonai bayrach et Avraham bakol. Avraham was old, his days had come, and the Lord blessed Avraham with everything. And so now we'll recite the Hadran for the sole Seder of Nashim, for the whole order of Nashim. Hadran alach Seder Nashim v'hadrach alan. We will return to you, Seder Nashim, and you will return to us. Da'atan alach Seder Nashim v'da'atach alan. Our mind is on you, Seder Nashim, and your mind is on us. Lo nit nashem inach Seder Nashim. We will not forget you, Seder Nashim. Velo tit nashem inach, and you will not forget us. Lo ba'alma hadin, velo be'alma de ati.